Hello and welcome to the AP Top 25 College Football Podcast. I'm Ralph Russo, the college football writer with the Associated Press. This is another two-guest week on the show. First up, we catch up with new Vanderbilt coach Clark Lea. The former Notre Dame defensive coordinator is a Vandy alum and a Nashville native. The hope is he can do for the Commodores what Pat Fitzgerald has done at Northwestern. Next up, I'll catch up with Stephen Godfrey of Banner Society. Stephen lives in Nashville, so I'm interested in getting his thoughts on Vandy and its new coach. Plus, a listener sent an interesting question that Stephen and I will dive into. Which programs are the biggest underachievers in each conference in recent years? The listener had some interesting suggestions. Tennessee and the SEC, Illinois and the Big Ten. We'll consider his picks and give our own nominees for the college football programs that seem to be squandering their resources. Thanks for listening to the AP Top 25 College Football Podcast. You can find us on Westwood One Podcast, Apple Podcasts, just about anywhere you like to get your podcast. If you like what you hear, give us a good review and rating. It helps college football fans find us, and it helps us find more college football fans. If you'd like to email the show yourself, send a question and comments to AP Top 25 Mailbag. That's AP Top 25, the digits 25, AP Top 25 Mailbag at gmail.com. And away we go. Joining me first this week on the podcast is the new head coach of Vanderbilt. Clark Lea was the defensive coordinator at Notre Dame. He is a Vanderbilt alum. He is a Nashvilleian. So welcome home, Coach Lea. And how are things going so far in your hometown?
Well, Ralph, first of all, thanks so much for having me, and it's so good to be with you on the call. So far, so good. We're hard at work trying to, build this thing anew here. And obviously, signs of progress are showing, but a long way to go yet. But having fun every day with it. All right. So let me start here. And I want to frame this something I did a couple of weeks ago. So I was talking with Steve Sarkisian in a similar type interview a couple of weeks ago, and I said, so Sark, why Texas? And of course, that's a question of well, why not Texas? And I'm going to ask you why Vanderbilt with this framing. I know Vanderbilt is near and dear to your heart, but Vanderbilt is also a school that has had a hard time figuring out the right combination. And you were at a point in your career where you had a great job and weren't necessarily in need of an upgrade quickly, young, and probably had some other options. So when I ask why Vanderbilt, I'm not trying to disrespect Vanderbilt, but I'm kind of wondering, what did you see in Vanderbilt where you thought, I think I can be successful there? Well, I appreciate the question because I think, it's an important part of the genesis here, the start of this, and that is the vision for it. And, look, I've always felt, obviously there's an emotional part of this for me, right? This is home. This is my alma mater. This is my football program. And, I think I did my best in looking at this opportunity and trying to pull the emotion out of it and really just look at it strategically. Being a head coach was something that I wanted to do, and being in a place that values the student athlete experience is very important to me too. And quite honestly, there are certain places that stand out when you start talking about that. And Vanderbilt's one of them. And then you start to kind of peel back the layers on what's going to allow this place to reach its potential. I think we're like an undervalued stock right now. Like we're like that program that has the makings of something really special, but just needs attention in the right places. And I think also, that starts probably with someone in my position that has a 20-year vision for success, that is able to look long term on this and say, what do we need to do right now? What are the changes we need to make right now that compounded over time will unlock kind of that breakthrough moment. And so, it starts with just looking at the league, looking at our conference, and just recognizing the fact that there is one outlier in the entirety of the league, and that's Vanderbilt. It's the one small private elite academic school. And so you start to look at that and you have a choice. You can view that as an inhibitor to success. And I think that is the easy angle to take. And I think that's really the reason I confront that question pretty much at every turn, in terms of why Vanderbilt. Or you can choose to look at it as an accelerator towards success. And I think that obviously that's the angle that I'm approaching this with. And my feeling there is you have this natural filtration system that gives you a certain pool. Our recruiting pool is going to go coast to coast. It's going to be about an inch deep, but it's a national brand. And if we can stay true to the Vanderbilt fit, what it's going to deliver us is high-reaching, high-achieving young people that are prideful in everything they do. And with that in mind, I think that's a great starting point for a really competitive football program. Beyond that, I think this is an environmental, conversation, meaning what is the environment that I'm setting every day? How do we make this a winning environment? And honestly, Ralph, I think part of that starts with just letting go of everything that's been here. I mean, this 2021 team shouldn't be burdened by the history of the program. And so, for me, actively, it was kind of cleaning, out the second floor and even down to the graphics on the wall, just stripping everything down and getting a fresh coat of paint, getting kind of new people in places that interacting with our team that allows for our team to see this place differently and sees their experience here is from a different vantage point. And so all that combined, I think this is just, it's not going to happen overnight. It's not a quick fix place. It's not a place that is set up to just come in and make a couple of changes. And the next thing you know, voila, we have the recipe. I think it's a place where, we have to get the bones right, the structure right. Once we do, we have to renovate the team, meaning the habits and the heartbeats of our team, to make sure that they're filling these spaces with the right attitude, the right approach. And then, we have to recruit to it too. And I think that's going to take a lot of our effort and time, but over time, I think we have the ability here to compound our effort and to not only turn this into a winner, but to achieve a level of sustained success. That's what excites me every day.
Okay, so I heard an echo in there of something I would hear a lot from Notre Dame and Stanford, maybe Northwestern even to a certain degree, and that is the idea that the academic standards here are not an obstacle. They are what makes us unique, and they are something we should embrace and sell. And I've heard Brian Kelly sort of give his explain why until he truly understood and embraced that's when Notre Dame started to flourish. So, now you have been at Vanderbilt, so I'm not saying that you're necessarily just taking Notre Dame's blueprint and bringing it to Vanderbilt because you understand the nuances and differences between the two schools, but I couldn't help but hear some echoes. And I'm wondering how much your time at Notre Dame and hearing the way they do things is transferable to Vanderbilt.
Well, that's very observant. I mean, I think I learned so much from Brian Kelly, and certainly a part of that. I came in to his program at a time where it was a rebirth there. Out of the 2016 season, we were kind of charged with relaunching, and he did it. I mean, to this day, I'm learning from just observing his movements in that time and his willingness to step back and make hard decisions, and get fresh blood in the program. But the thing that struck me the most in my time there was just this relentless commitment to being authentic to the Notre Dame experience, meaning we're not trying to create something that that mimics some of our competitors just relocated in South Bend, Indiana. You're trying to create something that is just true to the spirit of the place. And that is absolutely what we're going for here. And I think we have to. It's not, I think. I mean, this is a place that needs to be recruited and developed in a manner that is authentically Vanderbilt. And when we do that, again, the things that we identify as traits of a Vanderbilt football player, traits of a Vanderbilt recruit, those are all things that when acknowledged and developed, you end up with a very competitive person on the football field. Like the things that we will focus on off the field, the holistic approach. What is a great student at a place like Vanderbilt? Someone who knows how to do hard things to standard, right? That is such a important building block to creating a competitive and tough football team. And we feel like that, Vanderbilt University is not only obviously a great university, a world-class institution where you're going to get a great education, but we don't think there's a better place to train to be a professional football player, to be honest, because, you get to play in the best league in the country, and you're also going to develop life skills and life habits that ultimately, when you have the chance to get to, to actualize an NFL career, getting the opportunity is one thing, but earning the outcome you want, getting through multiple contracts, sustaining a career requires a level of discipline and attention to detail that we feel like is embedded in the experience of a Vanderbilt football player. And so our guys, as time moves on and the athletic skills are kind of neutralized because age takes those things away. Although I'm trying to defy that myself, Ralph. I tend to be losing more of those battles than I'm winning these days. But as the physical skills deplete, we feel like our guys will be equipped with the discipline, the mental toughness, the fortitude to continue to add value to organizations, which to me makes this great training grounds for professional football players. And obviously, that when we talk about professionals here, we're talking about any myriad of vocations, but we want to recruit guys that want to have a pro football career. I think that's important. And we think we have all the tools we need to build a pretty good pro.
So Clark, you're 38, I'm 50, so I don't want to hear complaints about feeling old. All right. It's guys like you that make me feel, because when I got into this business, the players were much younger and they made you feel young, but the coaches were generally older than me. And now I realize that I'm older than a lot of the coaches as you young guys kind of come
Ralph, in. I'm with you, and Listen, I hold on to that youth as long as I can. So I appreciate you calling me out on that.
No worries. So listen, love and affection and an emotional tie or passion for a place, which you clearly have, I think can be a benefit, right? Because if you have a passion for something, it could help you get through hard times. But I also think there's a limit to the benefit that provides. In my mind, I think the greater benefit to having someone who knows a place and loves a place is more of the understanding of the place. And you've hit on some of the things in the way you kind of understand the Vanderbilt experience. Are there some places where the understanding of the Vanderbilt experience leads you to, I need to do some work here? All head coaches are very holistic in running their programs, but my sense is Vanderbilt might be a place where you need to be a little more hands-on in some areas that still need developing, that still need lifting up than maybe BK was at Notre Dame, and maybe even Dave Clawson was at some of the spaces that you were with him. Though maybe your experiences with Clawson might in some ways be more applicable to Vandy. So how does your knowledge of Vandy help you approach this job, and what nooks and crannies do you need to get into?
No, it's a great question, and I will tell you the starting point for me is really rehabbing the mindset around the program, and that's both in the building and outside. I think it's in the building, just making sure that everyone that touches this team sees the finish line, sees what we're building, sees what we're going to grow here, and kind of holds that in the forefront of their mind every single day. I think outside the building, it's both setting the grounds for what we feel like is going to be an ascent where, we're going to have a program that everyone is going to want to be a part of, either in a fan relationship or, as a recruit, but also insulating this program right now from that outside opinion too, because we talk every time we are together as a team about no one determines the value of being a Vanderbilt football player except for the players and coaches within this program. Meaning that what we're willing to invest in this and what we're willing to sacrifice for it is the value that it holds. And starting there, and then just, not being afraid to we're not putting governors on success here. We know that success is going to be the accumulation of small wins for us, but we also know and we believe that mindset applied over time gives us access to any goal that we wish to achieve as a program. And I'm not backing down from, making statements about winning here and separating from our competition and, the things that we feel like are going to separate us long term in a competitive aspect. So, this has been something I've thought about since, honestly, since I left from my time as a player, just this idea that to grow this program the right way, the first thing you're going to have to do is kind of just completely cut off this persistent negative mindset that surrounds the program, both internally and externally. Cut it off and wash this place clean so that you can build it anew with a vision towards what it could be. And know that, look, this isn't, the progression line to success isn't linear, right? We're going to have good days and bad days along with it. It doesn't change, the end goal and the finish line that we're working towards. That's a huge task, in terms of just separating from the mindset and redirecting everything. And luckily, I'm under the direction of Candace Lee, who's also an alum and who, has such a passion and energy. And we talk all the time, Candace and I do, about the fact that this is so personal to us, and she's such a great resource for me, and also someone who has been so supportive in little wins, little battles that we're fighting here to kind of get the foundation right. And then also, I come to Vanderbilt at a time where its leadership is, Chancellor Diermeyer is so energized behind our athletic programs, and specifically the football program wants to see it successful. And so when it comes to just changing that mindset, it starts with the leadership, and they're behind it, and they're on board with it and driving that narrative, to be honest with you. We have to really focus inward on our team, make sure that, again, the team is insulated from, the thoughts and opinions outside. And then, what we'll do is create a competitive product that will draw the people in externally. And at that point, the value of this program and the value of participation within this program will be perceived totally different than maybe it is right now. Outside of that, Ralph, I mean, like there are things that, I would say to you that, loving a place is loving a place at its best, and believing in a place is believing in its potential to reach certain heights. And it's just like parenting that way, where, you can be disappointed, but you can still have love and affection for, someone, right? Well, I view this program the same way. I mean, we're not content. Obviously, we're not happy with where we are. We're not, excusing, past performance. We don't take ownership over past performance, because right now all we're focused on is what we are building anew. But, I am very energized with the potential. I'm very excited about reaching for that potential. But, I'm not blinded emotionally by the idea that, the reason I'm here is that we've underperformed and things have to redirect. And so, the starting point for me is that mindset. There's a lot of other things, man. I don't know that the interview goes long enough, but that's not unique to Vanderbilt. I think anytime you're starting something new, there's a lot of work to be done, and that's part of the fun.
Okay, so I'm glad you mentioned Candace Lee, because it literally checked a question off my list here. She was going to be the partnership with her was something I wanted you to touch on, and you took care of that. So now I want to get you, before I wrap up, to focus a little on the field. And, listen, you're just starting from scratch here, but defensive coaches, don't get hired as much these days. Defensive coordinator is a tougher path to the head coaching chair. Now, I think offensive coordinators, because it's college football has become such an offensive game. I think that's a quicker path to the head coaching chair. As a defensive coach, how have you developed your offensive philosophy? And can you give me, obviously the players will dictate this a lot, but can you give me an idea of what that vision looks like?
Certainly. First of all, I took the angle on the offensive coordinator hire and just the offensive philosophy in general. I took the angle that we need to first focus on winning games. How do we win games? And part of that is going to be controlling games, and generating points and converting first downs and having the ability to, be in close games late and then relying on a competitive toughness and a conditioning level that will allow us to punctuate a win. But I wanted also to be able to incorporate some of the things that I felt like were challenging to me as a coordinator. And we interviewed a lot of guys for that position. That was intentional. Obviously, I wanted just to kind of get a really good feel for the landscape or what was out there, what were the philosophies that were most prevalent, and then also kind of just hone in on some of the prevailing mindsets when it comes to again moving the ball, scoring points, and the best ways to do that. And obviously you have certain vantage points that are, volume driven, how many plays you can run, how fast can you snap it. And that requires you to kind of line up with someone on the left, someone on the right, and simplify formationally. And I think at that point you're looking to win one-on-one matchups. There's a lot now in offensive football that's option football, just with the spread mentality. So the RPO game is how do I defend all 11 positions on the field, essentially. And we spend a ton of time defensively focused on that. And it's kind of, it's forced you to adapt a lot of your coverages and calls to account for it. And then all of a sudden you line up and you defend a pro style passing attack, and you realize that you've spent, the greater part of a fall camp and the early parts of a season, playing defense one way. And then all of a sudden it's almost like we're nearing the point of that offense is cyclical of returning back to some of the value in having a more traditional approach. More than anything else, I wanted creativity in that position. I wanted the ability to look at what we had and to build around the skill that we have on our roster. And I think being at Vanderbilt, we're going to recruit the best possible players that we can. There may be a year where we have a dynamic running back that we need to find multiple ways to line up and move and create matchups with the running back. We may have a dynamic slot, and then you want to be able to run the jet motions and leverage the perimeter and do those kinds of things, using shifts and motions and formations to create matchups. Those are things that have been challenging to me. Those are things that I think you can do and control a game. And then, obviously, ultimately for me, as we recruit, I didn't want to be so system driven that, we weren't taking the best available players. I want to take the best available players and build around them. And that's not just the initial part. To me, that is an ever evolving mindset. And so those were kind of the main ingredients, trying to complement what is the current themes we see repeated in offensive football, trying to design or build around a philosophy that I felt like kind of optimizes the strengths of our foothold in recruiting, and then never wanting to be limited by the system or discouraged from taking a dynamic playmaker because they don't fit the system. Let's take that playmaker, let's build around him and find a way to feed him the ball in space and move the ball and score points.
Clark Lea is the new head coach at Vanderbilt. He formerly was at Notre Dame as the defensive coordinator. He is a Nashvilleian and he is a Vanderbilt alum. Clark, I really appreciate you taking the time here today to give us a little insight on the project that you're taking on down there. Obviously it is a labor of love, and there's a lot of work to do. So I know your time is precious. And again, it's good catching up with you. I don't think anybody's surprised that you've reached this point. I think when I met you a few years ago, it was pretty obvious that you were on a head coaching track. And I think it'll be fascinating to see. And I know we're all interested to see what you do at Vandy.
Ralph, I appreciate you. Thanks for the interest. Great to connect. And when things calm down, look forward to seeing you again in person.
Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to seeing you and a lot of other people in person, Clark. So be safe, be healthy. Good luck to you and your family.
Thanks, Ralph.
Hey, all podcast consumers, Rich Eisen here. So often, aspiration comes from inspiration, with titans of industry being those torchbearers. With guests from the world of news, business, sports, and entertainment, my new show is going to give you their most in-depth first-hand stories that focuses on the humble beginnings and humbling moments that we can relate to in our own lives. The podcast is called Just Getting Started, with me, Rich Eisen. Listen on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your shows.
Joining me this week on the podcast is my friend, Stephen Godfrey from the Banner Society. Actually, it's just Banner Society. I think I threw it.
It's just Banner Society.
It's just Banner Society, right? It's just Banner Society, and I have a tumbler and a beer koozie that should remind me of those things. Stephen, thank you very much for joining me today from chilly Nashville.
Like I said before we went on, it's sunny, but it's not. It's sunny, but it's cold, but it's not the ice and snow that we've had. So we consider this is forward progress.
Yes. We, I get a little worried for you Southerners when it gets, snowy and I mean, forget what happened in Texas. That was awful. But even throughout the South, when it gets snowy and cold, y'all aren't really prepared for it for practical reasons, by the way. I lived in Mississippi. I understand that we're not prepared to deal with icy snow.
You and I can broker a friendly conversation about this because you are a New Yorker who spent a lot of time in Mississippi, and I am a Southerner who spent a lot of time in the Northeast. And it is not one or the other. It is just simply what you are prepared to deal with. And the counter I provide is that my wife's family, some of it she's a Louisianan, but some of it traces to upstate New York. And so every summer we go up near Saratoga, and there are homes that do not have air conditioning.
Yes.
Ever. And when it hits August there and it gets unseasonably warm, it really is different. It's a completely different culture if you're listening to this and you think, what would I do without air conditioning? So if anything, we should probably practice a little empathy and help each other out in these extreme seasons. But yeah, very much the same people, just different flavors of weather.
Really all the time. Empathy, really. Really all the time, but at least here. So I want to hit you with this because you are a Nashville resident. That it probably makes you as close to a Vanderbilt expert as exists. I don't know.
Yes. I'll take it.
And after talking with Clark Lea, I wanted to get your thoughts on sort of that hire, what's the ceiling there? If this could be the Pat Fitzgerald of Vanderbilt, if that's even possible. I've discussed this on this podcast before. Like, it's one thing to say, oh, they're looking to sort of recreate the Northwestern model, but Northwestern does that in the Big Ten West without a lot of teams that recruit at super high levels. I don't know if that's possible at Vandy, but what do you look at as like, okay, but here's a reasonable path to success, or here's attainable success at Vandy that Clark Lea is maybe positioned to attain?
So I will say this at the outset. I should disclose my bias in that I've lived in Nashville. This year is my 15th year. I live very, very, very close to the campus at Vanderbilt. And I have always said, sort of tongue in cheek, I have a Vanderbilt bias in that I wish they were in the top 10 because it would be the easiest commute for me. as a working dad, that, a Saturday where Vanderbilt's in the top 10, that'd be perfect for me, right? Just cover the home game. And that was like a joke in the industry. But over time, the more I think about it, I've said this to people. I've said this to Candace Lee, the athletic director. I've said this to various people that work at Vanderbilt. This should be the model. If we are true to ourselves about what we claim college athletics to be, Vanderbilt should be the model. And they're not, especially in college football, for many reasons that we could take apart over hours and hours. I think when they were going through this process to hire Clark, it was the first time that Vanderbilt has come as close as they needed to be when it comes to the self-examination as to why they are not Northwestern or Stanford or any analog, even Duke. Duke really found success with David Cutcliffe by sort of leaning into the things that they could be good at. I think they took advantage of a questionable ACC, but we always run into some tropes when we talk about Vanderbilt, and you hit on one of them, which is you can't be Pat Fitzgerald at Northwestern because you're in the SEC. So let me push back against that a little bit, because I feel like inherently I'm pro Vanderbilt, because it becomes sort of this guiding star for me, Ralph, that if this thing is really amateur athletics and this thing really is about creating, better human beings throughout some sort of like educational process, and it's not just simply the multi-million-dollar machine that you and I work inside of, then offering an amazing education and playing in the best conference in the sport, shouldn't that be the pinnacle? Shouldn't that be the best recruiting pitch in the world? It's not, but I mean,
no, I agree.
Does that make sense?
No, I agree. It is. Yeah, it is. It is the hypothetical, best case scenario for college athletics.
And so I think the task in front of Clark specifically, and why he is uniquely suited for it, is obviously he's an alumnus. If you didn't know that, he played at Vanderbilt. He went to Vanderbilt. He's also from Nashville. He was a star at MBA, which is a very prestigious private academy just down the road. He is very Nashville, for lack of a better term. I think that helps. I think he has a very sober analysis from what I've heard. I have not yet interviewed him either, but I think he's had a very sober analysis of where Vanderbilt has failed. And there's a trap here in Nashville where it's a very gilded culture. There's a lot of money involved, and they're very proud of their degrees. And there has been this longstanding assumption that they were just going to be good at football because they're in the SEC. Well, as you know, like that's just not how it works. It's a meat grinder. They will chew you up and spit you out. And Vanderbilt fell behind in pretty much every manner in which you could fall behind. Now, I will say this about the Big Ten comparison, and it's the SEC. Vanderbilt found success with very little to no resources under James Franklin because they were able to work the margins. So when we talk about what Vanderbilt should be and we talk about what Northwestern is, and you get really into the very specific comparisons, there is potential right now for Vanderbilt to be better than they are. I think you would agree, right? Like they've been pretty abysmal since Franklin left, and Mason never really got it going, right?
No, sure, especially considering, the quality of football within the area, though Vanderbilt's probably going to need to recruit a little more nationally with that model, but you should get some benefit from football in your area improving.
Exactly. So, and I'll get to that in a second. So you have that. And then you also have this issue of, they're in the SEC. Okay. Essentially, when Franklin left, you can pretty much chart Mark Stoops showing up at Kentucky and pitching them a very long-term plan of program investment where we're going to develop guys. It's going to take a long time. And they did. It took a long time. But now, Kentucky is a reliable 7, 8, 9 win program. Now, how long could that last? I don't know. But that was sort of the model. They kind of stole their fire. And the way they did that is by taking those margin wins away from Vanderbilt. I would add this. We have not seen Tennessee even be able to sort of stand up on their own two legs as a program for about 16, 17 years now, right? Mm-hmm. There isn't this stranglehold in the East the way people would assume. Because at Vanderbilt, and I don't think this has changed because they've changed coaches again, no one is asking you to be Georgia or Florida.
Right.
But after that, who can you be?
Yeah.
There's really no limit.
If you're shooting at South Carolina and Missouri, those are attainable. And again, as Tennessee is dysfunctional, listen, over the last, 6 or 7 years, Vanderbilt has won more Vanderbilt Tennessee games than I believe Tennessee has. And that's a little foreshadowing to our next topic, by the way, on Tennessee. Yeah. But right. There are attainable victories in the East for Vanderbilt, far more so than there would be, let's say, in the SEC West.
Yes. And if you look at what Northwestern does, they established a ridiculous amount of program consistency. And I'm going to butcher this stat. This was pointed out to me by a Northwestern grad, Roger Sherman, who works at the Ringer, and he used to work with me at SB Nation, that Northwestern didn't even turn over a position coach for something more than like 10 years. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so Fitz basically established such a ridiculous amount of consistency in player development and scheme and philosophy that even as the Big Ten changed and the division structures changed around Northwestern, there was a level of consistency there to where they're not built to out talent you. And Vanderbilt's not going to ever out talent Georgia and Alabama and Florida, et cetera. But there are so many ways in which good football coaches can use the resources in Nashville to create those margin victories, right? Their permanent cross-division opponent is Ole Miss, who is either wildly talented or not. Right. It's a team that peaks and valleys tremendously. They're not consistent. There are ways for Vanderbilt to have more of an edge in that.
You are not overburdened with Ole Miss, because Ole Miss will definitely hit some severe valleys within its peaks.
Well, Ole Miss is a functional fireworks accident, which means that a couple, like you're going to get a beautiful show, and then sometimes like someone's going to lose a hand. Like, and I say that as an alumnus. It's a winnable rivalry. It is. Not always, but there are ways to pick up wins. There's ways to schedule wins. I could definitely go into a rant about how I don't know what Vanderbilt thought in the previous administrations about these non-conference games they're scheduling. But you need to schedule wins. You don't need to schedule anything other than wins. Full stop. So you build upon all that, and I think some of these problems, Ralph, will start to take care of themselves, and that's when Clark Lea, as what I said earlier, alumnus, guy who's connected in the city, he needs to go to some of these alumni who just don't get it with very deep pockets. They don't understand what it takes, and say, are you actually in or are you actually out? You can't be half a gangster in the SEC. Mm-hmm. You either have to be a dedicated booster and dedicated to financing all the little things, and you hire the analysts, and you build the facilities that you need, et cetera. I mean, if you've never been to Vanderbilt Stadium, they don't have a luxury suite, period, full stop. They don't have chairs. They don't have seats with chair backs on them. Mm. You get them like you do at a minor league baseball game where you walk in with them. The facility is ridiculous. I had a situation when LSU was winning the national title. I was at the game they played at Vanderbilt early in September. So not this past season, the one prior. And the LSU players in the post game, the locker room is next to the visiting press center, which is this really ugly center block room. And it kind of backs up against the visiting team bathrooms. And they're in there just making fun of how bad the facilities are. And the media, we're hearing this because it's like through a slotted door that we're all crammed it next to. And I told the administrators after the game, I was like, yeah, I'm going to mention that because I couldn't help but hear it. Mm-hmm. I wasn't in somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. And I'll say this now. I had people at Vanderbilt say, good, I hope you do. Because there's been this push-pull problem on West End Avenue here in Nashville where you think just because you're Vanderbilt or just because you have SEC on your sleeve that you're granted something. And that's just not how it works. So I think Clark Lea needs to work the margins for a couple years, definitely recruit nationally like you spoke about, increase your presence in the South, and then go back to Vanderbilt and say, hey, guys, are we serious? Mm-hmm. Is this a team that's going to go to the Liberty Bowl once every 5 years? Or are we going to be an 8-9 win team? What about the old Baylor can we be? What about Northwestern can we be? What about Stanford can we be?
Yeah, it'll be an interesting thing to play out there. Again, I think one of the things that was super interesting to me about him landing there is, as much as clearly the heartstrings pulled him there, he also very much could have said, no, I'm in great position here. I will get something better. So that will be an interesting dynamic. And just to set the record straight here, over the last 9 years, Vanderbilt is 5-4 against Tennessee.
Nice. I would point out real fast before we transition, just because you're an alumnus somewhere, it really doesn't mean what people think it does outside of our industry. I feel like I need to impart that on people who don't work in the industry. Just because it means a lot to people who cheer for their teams at college they went to. I get that. That's sort of the backbone of fandom in our sport. When you are a coach, that's not the case. Clark Lea was the defensive coordinator of an extremely good Notre Dame team, which means he could have gone in any number of directions. So yes, all that stuff I said is true, that he's from here and he played here and all this stuff. But the bottom line is he could have easily ended up at a job that is quote unquote better right now. He chose to be here, I think, because I think he thinks he can push some of these boulders out of the way.
Right. And has institutional knowledge to possibly get that stuff done. And that's what's important about his, about his Nashville-ness and his Vanderbilt-dom. All right. So now we're going to transition into a topic that a listener sent along to me, an email. And I thought the email was so interesting and had such rich, there was such a richness to this topic that I figured we could make it just a whole show. And then I had to think, okay. who was I going to talk to about this topic? And I thought I needed somebody insightful and entertaining and at least a little bit, if not a lot, acerbic. And then I thought, well, I know the perfect man for this job. And Stephen Godfrey scrolled to in my contacts, and I sent Stephen a text, and he agreed to come on because again, wealth of knowledge, good G5 knowledge, and I
was going to say someone who wastes a lot of time thinking about things in the group of five, right? Because I do. So
the listener, and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your last name. It Paul Fincannon or Fincannon. He apparently works at Georgia Tech, and he did all the very nice compliments at the beginning of his about the compliments to the show in the beginning of the email. But his overall topic was, which schools are the biggest underachievers in each conference? Which schools, and he sort of framed it at first within his own dear Georgia Tech, because that's where he works. And
man, that's exactly where I wanted to start. Yeah, that's really curious.
So let's do that, because he gave, and I want to give Paul some pops here, because he also gave suggestions in each conference, and we are going to try to get to each conference, and I promise we will try to keep this under 2 hours. All right. But you're going to have to help me on that one, Steve. So we will, but let's start in the ACC. He mentioned Georgia Tech, I think, sort of like as a place where his heart bleeds. So he wants Georgia Tech to be better. But when he gave a suggestion as to who the underachiever in the ACC is, he also suggested Pittsburgh, saying that maybe he might be a little fixated on the 70s. I have different ideas here, but I will throw to you, and then we'll come back to me about what I think. Who do you think is the biggest underachiever within the ACC? And then maybe we also need to start this by defining what we mean by underachiever.
Yeah, and this may fluctuate as we go conference to conference, because circumstances are so, all politics are local, and that's never truer than our sport, Ralph, as you know. The sport is vastly different as you go across the country, and I don't know if you can say that about any other pastime in America. It's not Georgia Tech. There's a bizarre exception that's created by going triple option with Paul Johnson. I don't think it was a good decision. I think they're still suffering for it, and I definitely think there's been a malaise there. I visited Georgia Tech twice. I've been working on a feature about Jeff Collins and sort of this new cult of personality and culture that these modern coaches do. I've been working on it forever. Kind of got derailed by COVID. I want to say that, yes, there is underachievement at Georgia Tech. No, they do not embody it. And when I looked at the ACC for the purposes of this, I thought about what defines ACC football and, what we consider to be good standards and bad. And this is going to be kind of controversial, Ralph, but I really do feel like it has to be Miami. And if we had this conversation in maybe one more year, it would be Florida State. But Florida State, has a national title within spitting distance. So the answer has to be Miami. Right.
Without question, Florida State is it's in the worst spot we've seen Florida State in our lifetimes, and even slightly before then. It's pre Bobby Bowden era Florida State right now, which is something we have most adults have never seen.
Right.
But you're right. I was tempted to say North Carolina State, maybe even North Carolina. Both North Carolina schools have always been sort of slotted into the categories of, well, they must, why aren't they better? Shouldn't they be better? They have recruiting facilities. They have great campuses. They have good atmospheres. They have money flowing through them. But then you sort of step back, and this will be a recurring theme for me, and say, well, if it's always that way, maybe that's just the way it is, and they're not underachieving. This is just what achievement is. So, considering what Miami has been within its duration in the ACC, it is kind of hard to argue against Miami, but I'll let you support your Miami argument.
Well, I would say this. I considered North Carolina and North Carolina State, and really looking at Tobacco Road, because when I talk to a lot of assistant coaches, there's been a massive upswing, not just one or two signing classes, but really a generational shift in football talent in that region. It's being addressed by other bigger programs that kind of come in and poach on the Carolinas. I do subscribe to your theory, though, that it's not so much about what you should be if you've never been it. And Miami, actually and inarguably, was the dominant program in our sport for a period of time, and then it went to waste. And to me, and this is foreshadowing some of my picks in the other conferences, that is the determining factor, is that you did nothing to build against it. And one of the things that I see so much when you look at college football cycling through generations is that hubris and the failure to act upon your success is almost always a recipe for disaster. Almost always. And Miami embodies that for better or worse. The smoke culture and, the Kane mutiny and all that stuff, like it was never, they never really capitalized on the success that they had because they took it for granted. I think it's really, I would be fascinated if someone can argue that against me at this point, but to me, it's so evident. And also the culture in the city, losing the Orange Bowl, it was all taken for granted, in my opinion. And now I don't know if they'll ever get it back.
I feel like there's another book. Maybe Bruce Feldman could write another book on what has happened to Miami and some of the unique issues that Miami faces, which prevents it from being the monster that it used to be. Some of it is hubris. Some of it is hubris and not building upon what you had and just assuming you will be what you have always been without putting the effort in. Some of it is Miami's dynasty being a unique dynasty, a private school, a place where it forget recruiting in 100-mile, 200-mile radius, basically in a 20-mile radius. Things along those lines that have undercut Miami, right? The Orange Bowl, which was a great selling point, and then you take that away, and now you're just another school that doesn't have on-campus facilities. So maybe Miami's bigger issue is we are expecting to recreate a time that was an anomaly to a certain degree, and that was be very hard to recreate because Miami's greatness was never built to last. Maybe it was never built to last.
You're touching on a lot of things I think will be a theme as we go conference by conference.
Okay. So to not get bogged down, and we're going to pinball back and forth between, Power Fives and Group of Fives. And since we're at the A's, let's go to the American. And again, my friend Paul here brings up East Carolina. And as we chatted about before the show, this was an interesting topic, and it's so interesting you have to really give some thought to it. Sometimes you can go on these podcasts and you can just sort of wing it because you already have these thoughts rolling around in your head. But this one needed some real thought. And my real thought on this came like lying in bed for over an hour thinking about East Carolina football, which doesn't sound particularly healthy, but this is what we do. And I really did come to the conclusion that I think East Carolina, which was Paul's suggestion, is the pick in the AAC unless it's USF.
It's about to be USF. Again, these things are so fluid. I think if we have this conversation in a year or two from now, I think just what's stacked against Jeff Scott right now, it's nothing against him. I think it's going to be USF for almost every single thing I just said about Miami. There is I have said this so many times. I wonder how many, if I just search my own articles for this phrase, but like this, the assumption of being in Florida. It's such a powerful thing, especially when you compare USF to UCF and the infrastructure investment, the on-campus stadium, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All the work that UCF did, feeling like, well, let's not take this for granted. Let's build something out. And USF just said, well, we're in Tampa. We'll just pick them off trees. It's like growing fruit. It's so easy to get talent, and it's just not. I mean, I've seen 1, 2, 3. I mean, I've talked to 3 former USF coaches in the last 20 years who are just exhausted and frustrated with that sort of lazy idea around the campus. And, Willie Taggart just said, hey, it can't be that simple. It's not that simple. You have to, like, a kid from Tampa is worldly. A kid from Tampa who's a good football player would just as soon go to Minnesota or Oregon State or something. If the right opportunity is presented. And so that's the hubris. Now, I will say this. I think it is ECU because it takes a minute, and some of the listeners may be too young, I guess, but ECU had a turnkey business going of pulling a lot of football talent out of the Carolinas that we just talked about that were not able to qualify or maybe didn't want to leave the region. And they did let it slip. There's also some major, I don't want to say malfeasance, but mismanagement at the budgeting level within the athletic department. That's stuff that's been written about in a lot of their local media. Also, do people remember that Lincoln Riley was an OC? Like, he cut his teeth there.
Right.
Lincoln Riley could have actually stair-stepped that job maybe had they not done his boss, Ruffin McNeil, so badly. There's a lot of mismanagement at ECU in the last couple of years. I really feel like the AAC otherwise stacks up clean. It makes sense that Cincinnati, UCF, Houston, et cetera, they're the successful programs. Memphis was the answer 5 years ago, Ralph. Before Justin Fuente, was that 6 years ago now? Memphis was terrible until they finally got it together. And so I think it has to be ECU.
Yeah. The way I would back up the ECU pick here is to understand, is just look at the fact that ECU is in the American. When the American was put together, the thought was we're going to go to pretty big metro areas and try to capitalize on the TV markets and the demographics, to create a conference that was not only competitive in sports like football and basketball, but also caught a lot of eyeballs and would be attractive to television networks. East Carolina doesn't quite fit the big metro area model, but East Carolina had a good football program. Now, I'm not trying to just throw Greenville into this, into like, it's not a tiny town here, but it is not New Orleans, Houston. Dallas,
there's no DMA. I mean, no, you're totally right.
But what East Carolina had going for it is a big stadium that it was filling frequently and a really robust football program with a long-term proof of concept that at times the history of East Carolina is that, I'm not saying every year, but you could go through the list here of East Carolina's year by year, and there will be years where East Carolina was the best football team in the state of North Carolina within the last 25 years.
Yeah, and definitely the most talented. Reminds me a lot of, I grew up a Georgia Southern fan, kind of a far-flung area of the state, inherently rural, really proud fan base. Didn't matter about where your status was or your conference affiliation. They showed up, they showed out. That stadium is as big as it is because of, there was a reason for that. So, to see where they are right now is just, they have not been able to keep up with the Joneses relative to these more, I guess you would say, the city-centric AAC.
Okay. So now I'm going to bounce back to the Power 5 and we're going to go to the Big 12. And the Big 12, I kind of wanted to come up with one that wasn't the obvious one, but I kind of think that we're the obvious one. Now, our friend Paul suggested West Virginia, and I think it's interesting to put them out there because I think he's framing it as ever since West Virginia went to the Big 12, they are no longer what they were in the Big East. And that is absolutely true. And that's going to be the life of being the one Big 12 team that's not anywhere in Big 12 country, right? And West Virginia has always been a program that has sort of like has done very well, even though it doesn't have natural recruiting areas, and it's just sort of like, oh, we're going to slip into Ohio here, and then we're going to reach down into Florida. So West Virginia,
they have to be exempt.
Yeah,
they have to be exempt.
I would agree. So then the obvious choice is who? The obvious choice is in the Big 12.
Well, no, it has to be Kansas because there is no worse team in the FBS and the Power 5 consistently. Ralph, how long I've been in this business a long time. I know you're in this business a little bit longer than I have, but like the functionality, are you kidding me? Like, I know I watched them go to an Orange Bowl. I saw that happen. Like, it wasn't a delusion, but the mismanagement and really the cascade effect of one staff's malfeasance sort of creating mountains for the next staff to deal with. I've never seen anything like it. I had very frank conversations with David Beatty after he was fired. And of course, he was suing the university to get his buyout. And when the Charlie Weiss decision making is still affecting this roster. Still, it's insane. We can talk about bad football programs and power conferences, but There are easier circumstances that feel a little bit more temporary to point to. We discussed Vanderbilt earlier, right? Kansas, it's a level of incompetence that almost seems willful.
So I got to tell you, I thought you were going to go Texas. I thought obvious was Texas here, but I do understand why why anybody might push back on that and say, listen, Texas within not that long a period of time was at the very top of the sport. Yeah. They have played they may be underachieving in the short term here, but right. I think the Kansas pick is interesting because they don't need to be this bad. Like this, okay. You're right. This is a level of terrible that is kind of sort of pushing on historic levels, at a historic level that it doesn't need to be, and it hasn't always been. Kansas football has very rarely been at the top of the sport, but even during its rough times, it has managed to be competent. And that Kansas has been incompetent for such a long time, I think you maybe won me over on your argument.
Bad is one thing. Iowa State was bad for a long time, and they have a good coach right now. This is not a bad football team. This is someone who should not be playing the sport. And let me circle back on Texas, because that was my answer until last week when David Ubben at The Athletic, who's a friend of mine, he covers Tennessee. We were chatting over some platform, and I thought maybe I'd save this, but I'm not going to write it. David, his experience is in the Big 12 and in the state of Texas. Mm-hmm. He broke my brain, Ralph. He said, if I wasn't live right now, I'd go dig up the message. But basically, he goes, Texas makes a little bit more sense, because we've all been sort of beating ourselves up in the brain, being like, what is it? Tom Herman, Charlie Strong, like, what is missing here? He said, when you look at Texas, if you look at Mac as an anomaly, and there's stats to back this up, that the success under Mac Brown was the anomaly and not the norm, Texas makes a lot more sense.
Yeah. So
it was just like, it was like a door open,
So I've heard this from David himself. He has posited that theory on this show. And I've also from Jim Fortuno, who is the AP's man in Austin, who has the great job, the perfect job. He covers both Texas politics and Texas football. And there is no place in the United States where that is a better fit. And he has also been framing that to me for years. For years, he's been saying, listen, what Mac did here is not necessarily the norm, and people have to stop thinking of that. So I get that. And I do think you did a good job of noting Kansas, because again, Kansas, it really is remarkable how far away they still are. Like, I was looking at it now, and there's no light at the end of the tunnel here. I don't see any progress really being made
I had
by Les. This is going to end. The Les thing is going to end after next year, most likely. And then they're just going to find somebody else, and he's going to have almost another massive rebuilding job. It's not even like Les is moving the ball forward here to the point, well, hey, at least the next guy won't be so bad off. I think that there was an assumption that there was a little bit of that under Beatty, that he had sort of taken the bullet for the next guy to a certain degree, but
they beat Texas.
Yeah. But it doesn't seem to be the case. Nothing seems to be getting better there.
At Kansas, I've had coaches tell me that I had a coach watching film in the Sun Belt say that he was like, I don't understand how Coastal didn't win both those games by two or three touchdowns more. Right. I've had coaches tell me that this doesn't even look like a low tier Conference USA program in terms of talent. It is staggering. I just want to overemphasize this. If you don't know about the sport and you think it's just a bad team, it's not. It's worse than that in terms of a talent and management aspect. And that's why it's just so glaring. I can't get past it.
Speaking of Conference USA, let's go to Conference USA. Now, Conference USA has, coming off a rough, no conference handled COVID. That might be a blanket statement. No conference seemed to handle COVID worse than Conference USA. Or maybe I should say COVID handled Conference USA in a more harsh way than it did any other conference. They lost a lot of games.
Poor planning equals poor results.
Yeah. The conference has really sort of been, whittled down to a certain degree. It may have been passed by the Sun Belt, as far as overall quality and programs. So, figuring out who the biggest underachiever of here, this was the one where I really came away going like, I don't know. I'm not really sure. But again, you are the master of the G5.
This is the most underachieving conference in college football, not by the merit of the performances individually, by the teams. I think just from an org structure, identity, and branding, I would argue 100% that this is the weakest G5 conference. The Sun Belt has far surpassed it. When you look at the coaching talent alone in the Sun Belt and what they're returning next year, there's no comparison. Mm-hmm. This is the hardest one to pick by far. Because the team I thought I was going to pick, to me, was so impressive last year, and that's UTSA, that I really think they figured it out finally. Mm-hmm. UTSA was created, and so they're like my pick, but they're not. UTSA was created essentially as a stopgap measure locally to say we know we can absorb more football talent in the state of Texas for obvious reasons. So in the San Antonio metro area, which is growing rapidly and has been through multiple censuses, let's create a Division I football program. They did. They hired Larry Coker, and it's kind of been rocky ever since then. Frank Wilson just didn't work out because I think Frank is the king of New Orleans, but he didn't understand Texas quite that way. And then they went and they made a really, really, truly inspired hire on Jeff Traylor, someone who completely understands and is of the world of Texas high schools. And it has just clicked in a way that I think they're going to be really successful from here on out. So now I have to pick one, Ralph.
Right. And our listener Paul mentioned Middle Tennessee, which I think is a little bit of a stretch, but I think that there is, because Middle Tennessee we have seen them have success. I think that's why he may have landed there. The idea that we've seen them be good. I think it's one of these major metro area schools, frankly.
So yeah, MTSU, if you don't know, it's I think campus is exactly 32 miles from the city of Nashville. It's in Rutherford County in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, which is just to the southeast. If you were going from Nashville to Atlanta, you would pass it. I think that is the pick, and I like his thinking because the problem is I'm going to contradict what I just said about the never wases and the has-beens and that kind of stuff. Middle Tennessee has failed to show any interest or aggression in capitalizing on a trend. And so in the city of Nashville, Ralph, Western Kentucky has found success, one, by spending money on football, two, by making inspired and sometimes risky hires as coaches, obviously, right? Bobby Petrino. But they've also been aggressive in expanding their identity, their branding, their marketing, and just plain old-fashioned ball player recruiting in the city of Louisville and the city of Nashville. Middle Tennessee State, from the outside, looks like a dead animal. They never do any media. They never do any marketing. They have scores of alumni. It's the biggest university in the state of Tennessee. And it is just simply lifeless and completely asleep. So I would agree with his pick. They've had some football success, but Ralph, do you know that like Rick Stockstill has one of the highest buyouts in the group of five? I mean, they're not going to get rid of him anytime soon because there's no money in the athletic department there.
He has been there forever. I remember hearing a good story about him. I can't remember. He turned down a pretty good job.
I think it was Maryland.
It might have been Maryland. I don't remember the details, so I'm going to fumble all over it. So maybe I'll just leave it there.
Maryland or like Minnesota or something.
Yeah, and that was a while ago, and now 10, 12 years later, he's still there, which is sort of it's a cautionary tale for, hey, I know you love your G5 school, but you really got to understand that it's hard.
You love it enough to be there forever.
Yeah, but if you say no once, you might be signing up for another you might not be signing up for another year or two. You might be signing up for your life. That might be your life or job.
Yeah, I think FAU is always going to be fine because the way they acquit themselves. FIU is close to earning this title for the segment we're doing.
Yeah, how about North Texas? North Texas came to mind for me because the simple fact that they've been so manic and haven't been able to sustain it. We have seen very high highs, but it always seems to be unsustainable. And now again, that just might be life as a G5. But I always found myself thinking,
TSU, man.
Yeah, I've always found myself thinking, and I've been to North Texas. They've got some nice things there. They've got some nice facilities. I found myself thinking like they should be able to maintain and not be so peaks and valleys.
They were, again, commuter school in the Dallas Metroplex, not a lot of attention, not a lot of on-campus spirit. It's a performing arts school. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of, I think music is their biggest department. And so it's always had that vibe of like commuter school. You care more about an A&M, you go to North Texas, but you cheer for A&M or Texas, something like that. So They've done a good job trying to shore that up. They've made some strange hires. Man, wow. Speaking of coaches that might have missed the boat, I don't know.
Yeah, Seth Luttrell.
Like his dalliance with Kansas State is going to be really interesting to see play out in the next couple of years.
Yeah, there are some whiffs of Stockstill syndrome there where like he may have missed his window. You know, again, he's in a position and at a school where they might be able to catch lightning again, find another what was the kid's name? Mason. Mason Fine, find another Mason Fine and rocket ship to a big year and a conference championship game. But it does seem like the window may have closed there. Let's bounce to the Big Ten. Our friend Paul, the listener, suggested Illinois as the most underachieving. And this is where to me, Illinois is the perfect example of, we always say Illinois should be better. We've been saying Illinois should be better at football for 40 years. Maybe they maybe they shouldn't be. Maybe this is so I will push back against the Illinois pick.
Argument.
Yeah, we constantly are thinking Illinois is underachieving when I think that maybe if you're always underachieving, this is just who you are. There may be a higher ceiling for Illinois, but I don't think they're necessarily the most underachieving within the Big Ten. Stephen Godfrey, who would that be?
It's Nebraska.
Yeah, it's got to be Nebraska.
It's got to be Nebraska. I mean, well, especially recently, because you've seen individual scrappy performances from the have-nots. So Michigan State was like a perennial Rose Bowl contender. That window closed. Yeah, Rutgers we don't expect anything of, but then when you look on that other side, Illinois the exception, I guess. If we assume Illinois is not going to be anything other than Illinois. Purdue's had good years. Minnesota, obviously, they've made good hires. Northwestern, Iowa. I mean, like, it has to be Nebraska. It's a process of elimination, especially when you consider. I mean, is this just the curse of realignment? It's kind of like Miami going to the ACC. It was supposed to be some major coup, and I don't want to turn this thing into a Nebraska bash session, but I mean, and there's another school in my state we're going to talk about in a second, but there is a just toxicity of believing you should be anointed or believing that you fundamentally are something that you aren't because of what happened 20 years ago. Okay, and Nebraska suffers in every regard.
So I will defend Nebraska here a little bit. And what I will say is even a recalibrated expectations. And I do believe within the state of Nebraska and Nebraska fandom, you are recalibrating expectations. I do think that the idea that we will be what we were in the 90s, I do think that's fading a little bit. And Nebraska fans and Nebraska, the entity that is Nebraska football, is starting to understand that, okay, that might never happen again. And we're okay with that. The problem is they're now even not they're now coming under recalibrated expectations. They are bad. They've been bad. They've been a bad football program for now about 5 of the last 6 or 7 years. That's unacceptable. It's okay for Nebraska. It's okay we're not going to have Tommy Frazier's Nebraska, but we should still be able to get to Bo Pelini's Nebraska. Nebraska should still be able to be Iowa. It should be able to be something between Iowa and Wisconsin. And the fact that it hasn't been able to be that makes it the pick as the most underachieving.
Well, they should
program.
At least be. I mean, they still should at least be Wisconsin. But let me, as a quick aside, I think it's related to when you look at Nebraska and Michigan specifically, we're running into a weird situation where the cult of personality around coaches is so big. What do they do if Scott Frost and Jim Harbaugh don't work out when it's not the native son? Like, what do you do? The long, sober look that you have to, in the mirror, I don't know how you overcome that, because in both instances, these guys were supposed to, quote unquote, fix the problem. And Michigan has won enough to avoid this classification, in my opinion, but they're close. And both of these programs are headed to a point in which they're either going to say, this is who we are and it's different and not as good as what we were, or they're going to fire their alumni, their former player alumni, native sons. It's an unwinnable situation.
Right. The world changed around Nebraska, right? The landscape of college football, demographics, everything changed around Nebraska. But so I understand why the expectations have to be recalibrated. But there is still, here's something Nebraska still has going for it. It's a lot of money. A lot of money in that program. That program, that program is one of the few college football programs, I believe one of the few athletic departments that I believe it is still giving back to its university, to the university side, to the academic side. So, you know, again, I understand they don't have the access to recruits and all those things that, you know, when they were the only game on TV and things along those lines, that era is gone, but you have to be better than this. You have to be better than 4 straight losing seasons and 5 losing seasons in the last 6 years. There's a gap there that, and again, Nebraska, someone like Miami, I could write thousands of words on what has happened to Nebraska and then what might pull Nebraska out. But you're right. I think when you fire the native son, when you fire the savior, who played for the school, the next step is to look yourself in the mirror and wonder, can anybody do this? Can anybody change this?
Yeah.
And
I don't
that's
know what
scary.
the next hire you make at either program is.
Right. And what's the plan? Like, not only what's the hire, but what's the plan? What's the plan to change this? Let's go to another group of 5. Well, here's one. I'm going to throw this one out there. Is there an underachieving program within the MAC? If there's anybody who will be able to identify it, Stephen Godfrey, it is you.
Wow, you're overinflating my abilities here. So the MAC is the amoeba conference, right? Where essentially, with the exception of what Frank Solich has done at Ohio, you can have a total fluidity in any program at any point where you could have a conference champion and then the coach catapults themselves to a P5 job. And then there's almost an instant regression, right? It's very common to see a 1-win team become a 6-win team, become a 10-win team, and then the cycle repeats itself. I mean, pretty much as I go down the list, everyone's had that experience. For a while, Eastern Michigan was pretty static, pretty bad. Akron is sort of in that position now.
Yeah. And for a while, Northern Illinois had cracked the code, and now they have no money at that school. And, you know, Toledo has seemed to be the one program that has been best suited to sort of resource their way to respectability. But as you know, I think it was Brian Kelly who told me, hey, these are all brick and mortar schools, man. Like you're all playing with about the same deck.
Yep. And so because of that, I would lean towards saying it is Northern Illinois because they mismanaged the situation, because their proximity to Chicagoland. And, you know, I say that it's funny because Chicago is not the football city. People just assume metro areas equal players, but Chicago's never really lent itself to that.
No.
This is the hardest one to nail down for sure. I would lean gingerly towards Northern Illinois. But, you know, gosh, even what Kent, and this is the problem, is that I fully believe Tom Arth is going to have a moment at Akron. Sean Lewis was a guy I met a couple years ago when the program was still really bad. And I remember writing and saying, guys, watch out. This guy's going to be good. And now they're good. You know, it exists at any program to do that in this conference. So I'll say Northern Illinois, but I don't even like that pick.
Okay. So let's just get into the SEC because this will be fun for you.
The easiest one.
It's got to be right because listener Paul says Tennessee, and I thought like, okay, well, let me try to be different and not say Tennessee.
You can't,
but it's got to be Tennessee, right? It's got to be Tennessee, and why does it have to be Tennessee? Nashville resident Stephen Godfrey.
I mean, I've been here for 15 years, like I said, and it's just like watching a cult come to grips with their leader being exposed. I mean, it never ends. It never ends. And I'm not trying to be myopic, but to watch what just happened with Danny White getting hired, a guy who, and I can't use I described him with particular adjectives, and I did this in a complimentary way. On Twitter, when he got hired, I said, that's exactly the blank that Tennessee needs. And what I meant by that was a very aggressive, headstrong, kind of egotistical athletic director who will take control of things behind the scenes, because that's what Tennessee has so badly needed. They've had these ridiculous warring booster factions for years, and it has involved the governor at certain points in time and his brother, and then other moneyed people. You have Philip Fulmer being, you know, a kind of a treacherous individual in a lot of regards in the history of Tennessee football. When you go back and look at like the Johnny Major stuff, there is just never a shortage of drama behind the scenes, and it has just seeped into the groundwater there. And so for Danny White to be hired and for this hire to have been bungled so badly, And I might add, we still don't know what the shape and size of the hammer the NCAA is delivering looks like, right? We don't know yet. But the idea that was told to me by everyone involved was that they were going to make a hire that was going to wow people through this upcoming valley because of the NCAA and because of the Jeremy Pruitt stuff, which, by the way, Jeremy Pruitt has the exact same lawyer fighting his buyout restriction that David Beatty did at Kansas, and David Beatty won. So I would just throw that out there.
Yep.
And then they ended up hiring a guy that UCF wanted to get rid of. Every UCF fan was elated when Heupel left. I had coaches telling me the week that he got hired, like, hey, he's a good dude, but, he better have something better than, not everybody just plays one high safety in the SEC. Like he's got to create some flourish to that playbook. And so it's, Ralph, the fact that this happened at Tennessee is just, they constantly seem to outdo themselves in bungling these major moments. And so from the point in time in which Philip Fulmer loses to LSU in Atlanta in 2006, I believe. Yes, because then LSU goes on to win the national title. It was after the Florida national title that year, 06, 07.
07.
Every single thing goes wrong. Fulmer's grasp on the power control, it all kind of, it just breaks apart. Then Kiffin goes to USC after 1 year, and then it's just been a parade ever since. And ironically, the Bush Jones years were the most consistent, and they could not wait to fire him.
So I believe we often lump Tennessee and Nebraska together.
All the time.
I don't know if that's entirely fair because, again, the world shifted around Nebraska and Nebraska didn't have any responses to that.
Yes, Nebraska's crops dried up in a blight.
Right.
And Tennessee set their farm on fire.
Right. So I believe Tennessee's issues have been more about Now, there are some landscape issues with Tennessee as well. It is hard for Tennessee to be good in a world in which Georgia is operating at Death Star level. The rise of Steve Spurrier led South Carolina had an effect on Tennessee. So there are other factors. There's always more than one factor, but I do believe that while Nebraska has had its problems and Miami has some issues, because they get lumped in a lot with that too. I believe there are more environmental issues with some of those programs, whereas I believe the mismanagement and dysfunction of Tennessee, it really is truly its core issue here. I think there are landscape issues, there are environmental issues, but there are more mismanagement issues with any of those programs than there at Tennessee than with any of those programs.
What I am consistently told all the time is that Tennessee, if the job were to be opened in a vacuum again, and like you were the person tasked with sort of piloting SEC or Tennessee football to the SEC for the next 4 or 5 years, that there would be, if it came down to Tennessee and Auburn for a coach, there would be no decision. It would be Auburn 100% of the time. And now that and I'm saying this as an alumnus, you can take it with a grain of salt if you want, but I'm pretty critical about where I went to college. It's akin to Ole Miss. That the job is. Mm-hmm. It's akin to Ole Miss, and that Ole Miss might actually have some advantages against Tennessee. Ole Miss's management is better than Tennessee has in terms of recruiting and branding and that kind of stuff. And so I don't know how many ways I can say this to Vol fans, and I think the majority of Vol fans get it. They're just exhausted. It's really the people with money and power in Knoxville that they're constantly poisoning their own well.
Okay, I have to take 60 seconds here to shout out my other choice here, the other place where I thought I could go, and that is Texas A&M. And it's hard to do that because Texas A&M is coming off of one of its best seasons ever, right? Literally, Texas A&M had not finished as high as number 4 in the AP college football poll, in the final AP college football poll, since it won the national championship in 1939, I believe it was, or 38. But so that's a really long time. So even though Texas A&M is coming off of a great season and seems to be at a point where it is trending up, and Jimbo has a chance to do some big things there, until they bump their heads on the Alabama ceiling. But I think using last year is is a way to frame why Texas A&M has been a longtime underachiever. Texas A&M has everything. They have everything, and they haven't been a top 4 team since 1939. They don't win conferences. Texas A&M moved from the SEC to the Big 12 and has been the same program. Mm-hmm. Texas A&M never won the Big 12 either. I think maybe once. There was the year they upset Kansas State. So with so many resources, and they're in Texas, and everything that Texas A&M has going for it, it doesn't have a lot of shiny trophies. So again, it's hard to make that argument right now, considering they are clearly on an upward trajectory. But I think historically speaking, not to the extent of Tennessee, when you talk about the recent dysfunction and really terrible football. But I think Texas A&M has to have some kind of honorable mention when it comes to underachieving football programs.
Yeah. It's such a seismic cultural change to go from who they were in the Big 12 to what they've been in the SEC. And technically they succeeded for a period of time and then dropped off aggressively under someone. But it wasn't like it was a failed plan entirely. And then to turn around and do the Jimbo thing, like it's not an overnight process. That roster was not what he wanted. I don't think they had a tight end on the roster when he got hired.
Found one in JUCO. Yeah.
Yeah. I think probably what you and I aren't saying is that we believe A&M will continue to be good in 21 and 22 and maybe be a foil for Bama for a minute, mm-hmm. The way LSU was for a minute. So, yeah, they're exempt, but barely. I see where you're getting at. And also, I do think it's a historically, technically, it is and never was. And it doesn't make sense, but maybe that's just the state of Texas.
Right. Right. And you could draw some parallels to the University of Texas there. Okay. So let's hit, we got 2 more G5s and a P5. We'll go to the G5, and that is, the Mountain West. Our friend Paul, the listener, suggests UNLV, which I thought was an interesting one because, they play some pretty good football. In Las Vegas, in Nevada. So yeah, maybe UNLV, it has always struck me as because they've been so bad. UNLV football has been so bad for such a long time. There have been so few glimmers of oh, look, they went to a bowl game and they almost immediately slide back that, yeah, maybe UNLV, but what do you think there, Godfrey?
It's 100% Colorado State.
Okay.
Not even close. So Boise State obviously sets the standard here. UNLV is an inspired pick, but honestly, from a resource standpoint, a management standpoint, they just haven't had it together mm-hmm. to the point in which there wasn't enough invested in the program for me to say they were underachieving. They were probably achieving roughly to commiserate to what they were investing in it. Colorado State is a shining, scary example of the fact that you cannot build your way into success. You cannot buy your way into success. They have, to their credit, as a college town, as a university, and as an athletics program and the functional building structure sense, done everything they should to try and keep pace with a Boise State culture. And it has not worked because of the wrong hire at football every time. It's the wrong hire. This last coaching cycle that they went through was just bizarre. If it was a Power 5 school, it would have received so much more national attention, but we were all focused on bigger job openings at the time. It was right before COVID. If you need a refresher, Urban Meyer, who doesn't really have a natural connection to Fort Collins, was brought in to oversee this really weird committee search that ended up with a stacked deck of Urban Meyer associates. And they settle on Steve Adazio. It's just a strange thing to do. So to me, it has to be CSU because they wanted it so badly, but they're really no different right now than Wyoming. And Wyoming has a fraction of the resources. They're in a state that is not like Denver is a massively growing area. And what that means is more people going to public schools like CSU, which means more money coming in. It's not so much about football talent as it is just a general population usually encourages, successful business. And Wyoming is doing it with none of that, right? Laramie looks like the same little rail town in the Wild West as it did 100 years ago, and their football program is about the same.
Yeah, Colorado State has built a relatively new stadium. It is beautiful. It is a program with a history of success. And you're right. I think I think Colorado State, listen, not long ago when we were having the conference realignment discussions, Colorado State was one of the, hey, maybe they would be a good fit for the Big 12 for some of the reasons you're talking about. Not that far from Denver, growing metro. Like you could sort of look at Colorado State and see, oh, that's kind of like Kansas State. Like that looks like a Big 12 town in many ways.
Well, it's funny too, not to get off, not to deviate too much, but if Colorado State were to go into the Big 12, they'd automatically be more successful than Colorado because Colorado grossly underestimated the recruiting shift that quote unquote becoming West Coast would do to them. And they found out that they were so much more reliant on the Plains states and on Texas for really just personnel. I was shocked that they didn't figure that out until late, but you saw it as they tried to compensate with a type of players. And they've really never figured it out since. So Colorado State, if they ever got a shot to go to the Big 12, that would be huge.
So let's talk about the Pac-12 then, since we just dove into there. And Colorado could be a candidate here. And clearly, in the most recent history, USC has absolutely underachieved. But I don't know if we want to be that recent. Our friend Paul, the listener, suggests Arizona. And again, Arizona has a little bit of an Illinois thing where, shouldn't Arizona be better? But they never really have been. Though Arizona does have that great, well, not great. The anchor of they have never been to the Rose Bowl. So that is always that's sort of a stark thing to attach to a program because Cal has been without a Rose Bowl appearance longer and Oregon State has been without a Rose Bowl appearance longer, but never going to the Rose Bowl is something that sort of is very stark for Arizona. But I don't go Arizona. Listen, well, I'll let you go first here. Who do you think?
I told you I told you my logic would be contradictory as we went conference to conference because of the very wildly different nature and culture of these conferences. I cannot move past USC. I can't.
Oh, wow. Okay.
All right. I thought maybe UCLA.
Yeah, that was mine. I think that's mine.
Okay. UCLA, I feel like it's like a 1 and 1A situation. What is going on right now in college football? I swear, Ralph, you could have me back on and I'll just scream for an hour about this. Is that we're not a national? We're on the very, very tip of the cusp of becoming something less than a national sport. I believe this. I'm a Southerner. I went to school in the SEC. I'm from the state of Georgia. I should not be looking at this the way that I am, and that is that I'm seeing a retraction of the sport, and a major issue right now is in the Pac-12. And when you look at the Pac-12, whether you like it or not, whether you agree with it or not, USC has to be strong and functioning for the Pac-12 to be strong and functioning. That's not a slight on Oregon. What they've built is amazing, and they've changed the way we look at college football in so many ways, right? And Washington can be good or great, but it has to involve Los Angeles. It has to involve talent in the greater Southern California communities staying in the Pac-12. And right now, USC was bad because they were losing recruits to Oregon, Ralph. Now the entire Pac-12 is losing recruits to Alabama. Okay. So what about college football has gotten so askew where a 5-star quarterback prospect in Southern California wants to spend 4 years in Tuscaloosa, Alabama? It's because that is a professional development program. Okay. People always joke on talk radio when I do appearances, is Alabama cheating? And I'm like, why would they need to? If you are any kind of level-headed and you are a quality football player at literally any position in this sport, Alabama statistically can show you that you have a higher chance of becoming a millionaire for playing this sport by going to their university. We have gotten so far out of whack with the power balances, specifically the attrition in the West Coast. I am legitimately worried about this sport, and I demand that USC get their stuff together. Right. Because if Heritage Hall can't figure this out, then I don't know how the Pac-12 is going to acquit themselves. And we haven't even gotten into the conference office issues, right? But if USC is not healthy and dominant and able to plant a flag in Los Angeles and the West Coast for this sport, I don't know that the other schools can. And I think that the sport will continue to suffer for it.
Right. So you are picking USC, and you are
vehemently,
specifically placing a heavier burden on USC. But I don't think that's an unfair burden.
Out of respect and history and it is a Tiffany brand that has just looked. I think it's kind of scary too, because sometimes they still are pulling in amazing position talent, like at wide receiver, and it's not translating to the league. I mean, there are a lot of red flags, really, all the way from identifying personnel at the high school level to what they're turning out into the pros. Like, this is bad, guys.
And it is. You're right. It's not just dragging down the Pac-12; it's dragging down college football, and that's your hypothesis there. And I tend to agree with it because
unless Herm builds the most amazing machine at Arizona State, because they've done well recruiting in Los Angeles, and they're kind of making some noise in the conference. Like, I just don't see any other program with the capability of expanding to the size of what USC is when they're good. Yeah,
and so you're a Southerner. I am a Northeasterner. I have always looked at college football with something of a national view, a universal view, right, of the sport. Right. I've always sort of wanted it to be good everywhere and somewhat balanced everywhere. Maybe because I kind of grew up that way, thinking it was, not really even understanding sort of the nuances of why these areas are better than this area, and have educated myself on that by covering the sport. So yes, from a big picture standpoint, listen, this is the burden you carry, USC. It may not be fair, but this is the burden you carry. So when you are underachieving, it hurts the whole sport. It doesn't just hurt you. It doesn't just hurt your conference. It hurts the whole sport. And right now, USC is underachieving. Let's wrap it up with this. The Sun Belt. Everybody loves the Sun Belt. The Sun Belt is the upward trajectory conference.
My favorite conference.
It is your favorite conference, and it really, like, not just a few years ago, they were the punching bag conference. And listen, the conference is still going to be the buy game conference that takes a lot of lumps during September from SEC and ACC schools and maybe even Big Ten schools. But they had a moment this past year. It is a conference that I believe has surpassed the Conference USA and is now on better footing. It has more identifiable brands and has, I think it has programs that have figured out how to be good. But within that, there's got to be an underachiever. Which is the underachiever?
This is a really, really hard one. And I want to spend time talking about the success stories inside of this conference, because I do think they've redefined themselves. And when you look at the talent that's come in and coaching, both like a veteran like Butch Jones, who won at Tennessee, regardless of what you want to say, going to Arkansas State. And then I think Kane Womack was a great hire at South Alabama. I think that is a school with a just ridiculous amount of potential. And they figured that out with the new stadium. There's more good to talk about than bad. However, the one that trips me up, and I know they've had a little minute of success, is Georgia State. Because, and this just goes back to being from Georgia, and I'm also saying this as someone who's raised a Georgia Southern fan, so take it for what it was.
I am going to expose your bias here and say, and call you a Georgia Southern homer who is clearly picking on Georgia State here.
My mom finished her master's at State, if that makes anybody feel better. I'm not picking on State. I think that State did so many really inspired things in the Atlanta metro area, retrofitting the old Brave Stadium. And really kind of building out more of a city identity and getting people out to the games and increasing their profile. Obviously, they beat Tennessee. However, it still doesn't add up that they're not in the high schools as sort of that next wave up after the big dogs. And they're not quite. They're not there yet. I think with no. I don't want to speak ill of that coaching staff because they've done a pretty decent job, but it may need a more dynamic presence. But the reason I say Georgia State is that I think they have the most growth potential, and they've known this for a while, and they've kind of screwed around with it a little bit. It should be better on paper. It just should. Like what happened in Coastal Carolina should probably be happening first and more frequently when you're inside the Atlanta metro area. And now really a state, Ralph, that's as good as Florida and Texas with recruiting in terms of just available talent.
Yeah. Is there something to be said for this sounds completely counterintuitive, that they are too close to the action?
No, I that makes sense, because a lot of prospects want to get out. If you're a Gwinnett County kid, or if you're in DeKalb County, and you are not going to be on that SEC offer level, or you're maybe not in the ACC offer level, maybe you do want to kind of see the world a little bit.
Right. Why do I want to go to the commuter school in Atlanta? If I can't go to Georgia, if I can't go to Georgia Tech, why would I want to go to the commuter school in Atlanta? You know what? I'll take this flyer at Coastal and go play by the beach or
be a
State.
Two-star kid that goes to Minnesota.
Yeah, exactly.
I think, but that's what they have to answer, because there are schools out there who have done that successfully, like Florida Atlantic. Right? Mm-hmm. Why do I want to stick around South Florida? Like, why would I just drive up to Boca and go to college there in a sleepy retirement town? Oh, well, okay, here's reasons why. Like, they've done a good job of addressing why you should. That's why Georgia State, to me, maybe it's my Atlanta bias more than anything else. Like, to me, being at home, being in a vibrant city, being where you grew up, being in a metro area where you have a lot of opportunities in terms of internships and, employment after school, like, those things should start to matter more. And I haven't seen that yet. So I really do give them this title because I expect more out of them, because I value what they've done.
That's a little condescending coming from a Georgia Southern fan.
I know.
I'm just really disappointed in you, really, more than anything else. Georgia State is what you're saying.
Yeah, you should.
I expect so much of you.
Be better. They beat Southern Michigan.
They beat Tennessee.
Yep.
Stephen Godfrey from Banner Society. This has been tremendous. You were exactly the perfect person for me to tap into. Thank you to listener Paul for providing this question.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. This was fun.
Yeah, we went a long time here. So I thank you for your time, Stephen. And again, I really appreciate your insight, and I really appreciate you taking yourself away from your very large and young family. That must have been, I don't know if that's a bonus for you to get to be able to.
Without a doubt. Yeah. Anybody with a large young family knows that. Yeah. I have 3 under the age of 7. So, I'm shocked we haven't had any background noise. I need to go check for proof of life.
Exactly.
No, it's been great. If you were entertained by this long rambling conversation, please check out Split Zone Duo, which is a show I appear on regularly. And then you can find all my stuff at Banner Society at 38 Godfrey on Twitter and Instagram.
Yes, definitely check out Split Zone Duo with Richard Johnson, who was on just a few weeks ago, and Alex Kirshner. These guys do a great job of carrying Godfrey's sorry ass.
This is true.
Stephen, thanks so much, man, and have a good off season.
Yes, sir. You too.
And now, before we hit 3 and out, just like to say, listener Paul's pick for the biggest underachiever in the Sun Belt was Texas State. And again, thanks, Paul, for sending that email. It made for great conversation on this show. And now 3 and out. First down, let's talk about Texas and boosters. The Texas Tribune did a story earlier in the week in which it obtained through open records request email received by the school about the playing of the fight song, The Eyes of Texas. To briefly sum up the situation, the song is played after games. The players usually sing the song with fans. The song has some racist roots. Some players last year pushed back against being forced, or at least strongly encouraged, to stand and sing the song. Some boosters got angry about the players disrespecting the tradition. The last line is funny to me because it's just a song. Regardless, it was a thing last year and has potential to be a thing at Texas moving forward under new coach Steve Sarkisian. The one that really stood out to me was a booster letter that really framed the athletic program as something that belonged to them and that they grant the athletes access to. My mind immediately jumped to something that always infuriates me in college sports, and really even in pro sports too, but especially in college. Often you'll hear the phrase, it's a privilege to play college sports. I hate that because it implies the athlete has not earned that scholarship, that position, that opportunity, but it is something that others grant to him or her like charity. Certainly those who have the ability to earn an athletic scholarship should be grateful for their good fortune, the support of those who help them to get where they are. We should all be thankful for our blessings and have some humility when life rewards our efforts, because effort doesn't always equal rewards, and we all need a little good fortune to be successful. But being a Texas football player or a D1 scholarship athlete anywhere is not a privilege. It is a mutually beneficial agreement between a school and a young person. The school has determined the athlete brings value to their program, and in turn, the athlete is hoping to gain value from the school. This is the way Nick Saban always frames the mission at Alabama, providing value to the athletes. It's not charity. To call it a privilege to be a scholarship athlete, to me, has always been a way to demean athletes, to imply that what they do is really not worth what they are given, and to show that the power lies not with them, the talented, hardworking, and skilled, but with the people who grant access to the stages on which they perform. You will never hear me say that it is a privilege to be a college football player. Second down. The latest interesting news on the transfer front comes from Michigan and Florida. For Michigan, it's the announcement by former Texas Tech quarterback Alan Bowman that he is headed to Ann Arbor. It is a really interesting addition. Bowman has shown flashes of being a very good player when he has been healthy. He has also only played 19 games over the last 3 seasons. His best year was as a freshman under Cliff Kingsbury, and his production slipped when Matt Wells took over as coach of the Red Raiders. So maybe there is more upside with Bowman than has been uncovered. Michigan's quarterback competition was supposed to be between sophomore Cade McNamara and 5-star freshman J.J. McCarthy. Bringing in an experienced veteran makes a ton of sense, but remember my rule of thumb when it comes to transfer quarterbacks. If a coaching staff is truly comfortable with the players they have, they are not likely to add a grad transfer who is looking to finish his career as a starter. Bowman is one good season away from being a player who could get drafted. I doubt he wants to spend that season backing up in Michigan. We'll have to see how it plays out, but this suggests to me that Michigan would like to give its younger QBs another year of seasoning rather than Bowman is just an insurance policy if McNamara and McCarthy aren't ready. Third down. In Gainesville, the news was not about who was joining the Gators, but who would not be. Former LSU tight end Eric Gilbert posted on social media that he was decommitting from Florida. Gilbert was a 5-star prospect, and Florida fans were already penciling him into Kyle Pitts' position for next year. Instead, Gilbert is looking for another home. He is from Georgia, so the news perked up Bulldogs fans. He has the talent to be a difference-making player. Now, he'll be a sophomore, so to be eligible next season, he will need the NCAA to pass the one-time exception rule, or maybe he'll get a waiver. I think we're beyond that at this point. As we have said in previous shows, the vote on immediate eligibility, the one-time exception for transfers, is currently on hold, but will probably get worked out by the end of April. That is the show for today. I'd like to thank my producer, Sarah McCrory, for making me sound good. You'll find this podcast on Apple Podcasts and Westwood One Podcast. Please subscribe so you do not miss an episode. If you have questions that you'd like me or my guests to answer, email them to aptop25mailbag@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you on all topics, college football, serious or silly. That's aptop25mailbag@gmail.com. I'm Ralph Russo, the college football writer with the Associated Press. Thanks for listening. Come back for more next week of the AP Top 25 College Football Podcast.